Hi, I'm Luke Caltabiano,
And I'm Rebecca Kaminskis.
and we are presenting on how to get filthy rich in Rising Asia.
So, we're going to do a quick summary of chapters 6 through 12 and recap some of the themes that were previously mentioned last class and continue through the second half of the novel. So, first, each chapter continues to reflect the ideas and steps/guidelines for becoming rich in Asia. Though, during the second part of the book, they shift from obtaining riches to learning what to do once they're no longer available, when you lose everything that has been built during your lifetime. There are many great achievements the narrator has made in which they gain their success and wealth, but at what cost do they gain these achievements? They are so focused on maintaining their business and wealth that they lose the more important aspects of their life, including love, family, and trust. The themes that are shown are greed, corruption, consumption, disloyalty, and financial stability, or in the case of the later chapters, the lack of.
The historical and cultural context of this text addresses similarities in developing countries, crime and violence, marriage as a transaction, and relationships as a business transaction, as well as corruption. And while the location where the narrator lives is never specified, it can be assumed that it takes place in a developing country due to the violence, poverty, and discrepancy in socioeconomic classes. However, there are many similarities that can be found in the story's setting to that of a developed country like the US. The variation in wealth and poverty in the text is similar to that of a country like the US, where those at the bottom have next to nothing, while those at the top have everything, including the power and control. In the seventh chapter, titled Be Prepared to Use Violence, the chapter goes into the violence and crime that is involved in big business. The narrator's guard eventually kills the boy that had threatened him previously, and this is treated as almost a normal business transaction, in that the boy's boss does not care about him dying, but more about how he will have to cease the threats against the narrator. The marriage of the narrator with his wife is consistently deteriorating throughout the story, and at this point, their marriage is imminently failing. The narrator and his wife were in an arranged marriage, a common practice in culture in the Middle East. Their marriage is a legitimate transaction in which the narrator and his son-in-law arranged the marriage of him and his wife. Because of this transaction, they lack any feelings of love or affection toward each other and grow themselves in a relationship, but rather work together to fill the holes and create a life that they are both looking for. Corruption is seen throughout the text, such as in chapter 8, titled Befriend a Bureaucrat, where the narrator uses his past business connections to create leverage to grow his new water business. The narrator's only words to the bureaucrat that he's working with are "how much." This emphasizes the fact that anybody and anything can be bought, including bureaucrats and politicians. This is a major issue not only in these developing countries, but as well as countries all around the world, such as the US and other developed countries.
Then we looked into some sources in the library database and came across an article titled People and Corruption, Europe and Central Asia. It goes along with the main theme of corruption and how to get filthy rich in Rising Asia that Luke was just discussing. So this article discusses people speaking out against corruption, effective actions that can be taken, barriers preventing citizens from speaking out, social acceptance, and more. We're going to be focusing on actions that can be taken and why victims often do not speak up. So a quote from the article says that across Europe and Central Asia, around 1 in 5 citizens tell us that the most effective actions to help fight corruption are reporting corruption incidents and refusing to pay bribes. Though these are the most effective actions, many are afraid to speak up and worry about the potential consequences in doing so. So we related this to the novel because of the incident that occurred that Luke was just mentioning, and when the narrator was taunted by another business. So there were guards hired, someone killed for threatening, and even increased security in response to that situation. So then we can relate that back to why citizens wouldn't speak up, since they wouldn't want to end up in similar situations and worry about those potential consequences. And then this table shows the main reasons people don't report corruption, the top being that people are afraid of the consequences, and then the next highest being that corruption is extremely difficult to prove. So then that moves into the film, The Laundromat. So The Laundromat is about a widow who investigates an insurance fraud, chasing leads to a pair of Panama City law partners exploiting the world's finance system. But even more than that, it's a combination of scams, fraud, schemes, and secrets, all with never-ending lies within the business world. So The Laundromat shows many situations within the movie about how people are using shells to get to the top, and it's perceived as the only way to become rich and successful. And the widow makes huge attempts to get to the bottom of all the lies, but is faced with many obstacles and difficulty in doing so. So we can relate the movie back to the novel with how you had to cheat the system in order to make your way to the top. It overall ended in downfall, similar to all of the businessmen who tried to cheat the system and scheme others in the film. Both cases just show how difficult it is to escape these schemes and that you never know who you can trust within the business world.
So the other film that we watched was The Big Short. And The Big Short, a brief summary, is based on the housing market collapse of 2008. It addresses corruption, wealth and poverty, and morality. A brief summary of The Big Short is a hedge fund manager at Scion Capital named Michael Burry discovers that the housing market is at risk of collapsing, and he decides that he wants to invest in swaps that are betting on the housing market's collapse. He gets the banks on board because it is basically free money for them. And then another hedge fund manager, Mark Barnum, hears of Burry's idea and he gets Frontier Point on board. And then two men named Charlie Geller and Jamie Shipley learn of Burry's plan as well. And they bring Ben Ricker, a wealthy retired man from Singapore. They get him on board to back them. They all end up investing in these swaps, and along with the banks, they make millions individually and collectively billions of dollars. However, at the end of the film, it can be seen that they feel guilty that they profited so much from an event that hurt the American people so tremendously. And these people that profited and that gained so much from the collapse of the housing market, such as the banks, will not be held accountable and will not have to pay what they benefited from, while the American people will still suffer after and during the collapse. And in Mark Barnum's words, they will blame the immigrants and the poor people, even though they did nothing wrong. And to address the corruption throughout the film, these men, as well as the banks, are making money through these investments. And at the end, they become very wealthy, while over 8 million people in the United States have lost their jobs and fallen into poverty due to the collapse of the housing market. And it addresses morality due to the fact that they have gained so much while everyone else has lost so much, and they were not held accountable, and the United States government bailed out all of the banks and those who made the money, and only a small fraction of the people who were responsible were ever held accountable for what happened. And through looking at the course reserves, the novel The Wisdom of Finance by Mahir Desai addressed very similar topics and issues that the text How to Get Filthy Rich in Rising Asia also addressed. Some of the major points were relationships in business and romance, marriage as mergers. Filling a hole in your organization is not a merger strategy. Mergers of equals are horribly difficult, but potentially very rewarding. Relationships in business and romance can be seen in the text through the narrator's relationship with his wife, as well as his relationships with bureaucrats and others that he works with in order to bring himself up and bring up his business. In the Wisdom of Finance, the author addresses relationships as mergers and compares marriage to mergers. They address the merger of AOL and Time Warner in 2001, where AOL needed to grow its technology sector, which they were lacking in, and they thought that merging with Time Warner, who had already had a highly developed technology sector, would solve that issue. And this is where the filling a hole in your organization is not a merger strategy comes into play. Because AOL was solely looking to create this merger with Time Warner to fill the technology need, they did not due diligence in looking into Time Warner as a company and how it would affect them in the merger. And this is similar to the relationship between the narrator and his wife, in that it was organized as a transaction rather than based on romance, and they got married to fill each other's needs rather than to support each other and grow each other. And mergers of equals are horribly difficult but potentially rewarding. That basically means that while it is hard to create a relationship with someone that is of equal to you in terms of wants, needs, and aspirations, it will pay off much higher than merging with someone that fills a need, an individual need that you are lacking, because when merging with equals, you are able to grow through each other and benefit each other by working together and creating a strong relationship. While when merging with an unequal, where one party is in power, one party is in control, that creates an environment where the person or company not in control has little to no say, and eventually will not want to be in that relationship, such as the relationship between the narrator and his wife in How to Get Filthy Rich in Rising Asia.
So for the image of business and literature, we thought it was best to start with the quote, "Of late, you have had the impression of merely going through the motions of your life, of rising, shaving, bathing, dressing, coming into work, attending meetings, taking phone calls, returning home, eating, shitting, lying in bed, all out of a habit, for no real purpose, like functioning of some legacy water meter cut off from the billing systems whose measurements swirl by unrecorded." This shows how you can be consumed by a business to the point where you don't even know or understand your purpose anymore. And even at the end of the quote, he's still relating it back to his work with water, so he can never get away from it. And then we can also relate this back to Kafka's Metamorphosis, in which Gregor is more worried about work than the fact that he transformed into a bug and that his job completely consumed him. And it also relates to Bartleby with how he couldn't escape the 9 to 5 aspect and turned into a machine-like person, no longer finding meaning in his work and simply being on repeat day after day. And then to continue this, the end of works we read in class end in death, with a negative light cast around that. In this case, death isn't such a bad thing. So as the quote says, like, you're ready to die, you've loved and had courage and dignity, the goal was always to build wealth. There was no exact how or with whom, so it was done in the narrator's own way on their own terms, whether it was morally acceptable or not. And in the end, the goal was achieved, the money was made, the love was there, or at some point it was. And despite the devastating bankruptcy and ultimate end of your company, there was nothing more for you to accomplish, so there was no regret. Thank you for listening to our presentation.